でも諦めない牙と拳握りしめてこの運命と明日の記憶いつ砕いて守るよ
Mimiko stared at the open box in front of her. She suddenly felt very unsteady on her feet.
What the?
She stumbled a few steps back, knocking into Kotaro. They both went down, her crutch crashing to the ground beside them with a bang. They sat there in pure shock for what only seemed a moment or two, though it could have been longer.
Mimiko!
Her fellow compromisers were suddenly swarming all over the place.
Are you okay? What's going on? What happened? Speak to me, Mimiko.
Hibari was practically crying as she knelt in front of the stunned girl.
What about the kid? You okay, little boy?
Kotaro hitched up onto his feet, brushing off the woman who was trying to help him without answering her. He was strong after all. He went immediately to Mimiko's side.
Hey, Mimi! Mimi!
He tugged at her sleeve.
Mimi, can you hear me?
Jiro strode into the room moments later, coattails flying out behind him as he stopped in his tracks to assess the situation. One hand was on his sword. He saw several compromisers in full uniform standing about, some kneeling around in a group. Kotaro's curly hair stuck up from the small grouping. He couldn't immediately see Mimiko, but he could smell her ginger and orange scent. A few more strides into the room gave him the answer he was looking for.
Mimiko!
Somehow, he found his way through the press of people and knelt by her side as she stared blankly ahead of her.
Mimiko?
He put a hand on her shoulder. She shuddered once, closing her eyes. Janai stormed into the room about a minute later. He had to stop to catch his breath as he looked around. There were too many stairs in the building, he decided. Jiro's hat was the first thing to catch his eye, and he immediately went towards it, glad that he didn't see the silver katana out, a sure sign of immediate danger.
Everyone, please, go back to your work. We'll take care of this.
Several compromisers questioned among themselves, but the majority left. Hibari refused to leave.
Chief, please. I'm like Mimiko's best friend.
Go, Hibari. I'm okay now, really. I just tripped over my own feet and knocked the wind out of me. I'm okay, I promise.
Are you sure?
Kotaro opened his mouth to protest, but at a glance from his brother, he kept silence. Janai placed a hand on the younger compromiser's shoulders.
Please, Hibari. Everything's fine. You can go back to work now. There's nothing to worry about.
Okay.
Hibari left reluctantly. She wasn't convinced, but she couldn't go against her boss's orders. The other stragglers followed her. Jiro watched Mimiko as she tried to pull herself together.
You look a little pale.
He brushed some of the loose hair out of her face. He noted that she was trembling, her eyes closed as she leaned her head against his shoulder.
What happened?
Kotaro jumped to answer, hands on his hips.
Someone sent Mimi something really mean. It's over there.
He pointed at the partially open box. Janai stepped over to investigate. He pushed the flap of the box open, his hand jerking back at what he saw inside. His eyes went wide.
What is it?
Jiro watched Janai's reaction with surprise. Mimiko continued to shudder against his shoulder.
Roses. 12 dead black roses, with what looks like stinging nettles, and a dead snake wrapped around the vase.
The two men exchanged glances. They looked at Mimiko, who was trying to breathe evenly without too much success. Kotaro tugged on Jiro's coat.
Brother, what does it mean?
He looked up with large, worried eyes.
Why would someone pull such a mean trick on Mimi?
Jiro was about to answer when a dozen heavily armed men suddenly stormed the room.
Everyone, get down! Get down! Get on the ground! Get down!
Kotaro instantly hit the deck with a yelp. Screams could be heard throughout the building as the suppression team moved in, surrounding the place. Badrik Sarahan, head of the company's suppression team, moved into view. His full body armor was more than enough to intimidate anyone. His large automatic gun only added to the image. His men spread throughout the building, scanning, guns at the ready.
Search the building! Anyone not associated with the company is to be brought to me immediately! If they resist, shoot them!
Several of his men stayed in the room, their guns leveled at Jiro's small group.
It's all right. These three are fine. They work for us.
After a nod from Badrik, the men spread out, creating a periphery around them in case anyone tried to break in.
Shogo, what's going on?
In answer to his question, Janai pointed at the box.
Miss Katsuragi just received this as a delivery. I wanted to be sure that the one responsible for it wasn't anywhere around. It would seem that she's being targeted.
It's all right, Mimiko.
Despite the reassurance, the compromiser shuddered. She was trying to be strong, but with so much having happened in such a short amount of time, she felt like she was breaking apart, and Jiro knew it. He didn't have to be a vampire to smell the fear and confusion coming from her. Badrik peered into the box and took a quick step back.
What the?
He suddenly wished he were far away.
What kind of a sick joke is this?
A lieutenant approached him, standing at attention.
All units report clear.
Unfortunately, I don't believe it to be any kind of joke, but a threat against Mimiko's life. Not the first one at that.
The lieutenant stayed in position, clearing his throat to remind his captain that he was still there.
Your orders, sir.
Badrick gratefully stepped away from the box. He wasn't afraid of much, but the sight inside was enough to make his stomach churn, simply because he knew what it meant. He just didn't want to believe it. Sure, Miss Katsuragi could be a pain, and get in the way sometimes, but no one deserved that kind of shock. He wondered what she'd done to warrant such a threat.
Tell the men to stand down. Leave a small detachment here to escort these 3 home. I want the others to return to base and stay on standby.
The man saluted smartly.
Yes, sir.
He turned on his heels and went to deliver the orders. Several of the other men in the room followed after him. The captain turned to Janai.
I want a full explanation!
Jiro motioned his brother over.
Kotaro, stay with Mimiko.
He stood to face the suppression team's leader. He didn't like his attitude, and it was no secret that the two didn't exactly get along, probably stemming from their first encounter.
Gentlemen, if you'd please.
He reached out his hands to indicate that they should continue this discussion elsewhere. Mimiko didn't like the fact that Jiro was suddenly leaving her side. She opened her eyes, her hands automatically reaching out for him. But she didn't say anything as she restrained herself. Every line in Jiro's body was screaming to her of his shock and rage. She withdrew into herself, letting Kotaro take his place by her side. There wasn't much she could do about it anyway, short of throwing some kind of fit, and she didn't have the energy for that. The men moved to one side, discussing things. Occasionally, they looked towards the two still on the floor, sometimes also glancing at the box sitting innocently on the table. Their voices rose in intensity as they argued.
Mimiko won't agree to that.
What choice do we have? This changes everything. I won't let her put herself at any more risk. Not as her boss, not as her father.
I'm not saying you should. I'm merely pointing out how Mimiko will feel. I'd also prefer if she kept out of harm's way as much as possible. But we both have a hard time convincing her of that.
I know.
Badrick folded his arms.
We can have several of my men keep close watch.
An escort?
Jiro raised his brow. The captain shifted his stance.
More like bodyguards.
I thought that was my job.
It is, Jiro. No one doubts that you can't handle it. What Saren is suggesting is more of an advanced guard. I know you don't want to miss out on any of the fun, but someone has to keep a close eye on Mimiko. And you're the only one I can absolutely trust with this situation. We have no idea who we're dealing with. You're our last line of defense and our first main source of protection.
When you put it that way, how can I refuse?
Janai thumped his back with one hand.
Good man.
He turned to Badrick.
Instruct several of your best men to keep an invisible guard on them at all times. We don't want our enemy to know they're there until it's too late.
Jiro nodded in thanks. Keeping the extra guard as invisible sentries meant he didn't have to bother telling Mimiko about it, and it gave him a little more room to work with if it came down to a confrontation. If he had to, he could hand her off to one of Badrick's men, though he certainly hoped it would never come to that. Badrick headed over to talk to his men while Jiro and Janai went back to where Mimiko and Kotaro waited. The chief paused.
Jiro, you know this changes everything. I originally planned to have her start back tomorrow, but you know that's not possible now. However, as you pointed out, she'll strongly oppose being taken from duty completely. At the very least, I have to give her a few more days before she comes back. You can give her any excuse you want. I want her to be safe again, above anything else.
I don't think a few more days will be a problem. I'm sure she'll need them to recover from today. Any normal red blood would.
Janai nodded in agreement.
I'm gonna have the lab process those flowers to see if they can find anything new. I'll give you the report as soon as I have it in my hands.
Sayuka pushed her glasses back up her nose as she stood in front of her employer. It had been a long day, but a rewarding one.
Lord Zellman,
She bowed slightly, holding him the latest reports.
this includes the incident today at one of the company's buildings.
Zellman took the offered report with a questioning glance. Trust her to be on top of things. He flipped through the papers, scanning them.
Most interesting. They've become more bold. I think it might be time I stepped in a little.
He smiled maliciously, his fangs protruding as his eyes glowed red. Mimiko complained of a vile headache the moment they returned home and immediately went to her room. No one questioned her. Safely in her private sanctuary, she let the tears she'd held back to flow freely, not caring if Jiro could hear them or not. Jiro paced the front room, one ear turned towards her room while he also listened for any unusual sounds from outside. Though part of him demanded he stay as close to her as possible, he also knew that she needed the time to fall apart privately. But it took almost everything in him to not rush in and comfort her. Kotaro was busy playing in his room, quietly. The older vampire could hear him humming to his bear, crayons scraping across paper. He probably didn't have a firm grasp on what was going on, but then again, his intuition was often surprising for a 10-year-old. He'd known enough to keep it down in case the compromiser wanted to sleep. Thinking on the topic of sleep, Jiro turned more attention to the back bedroom, listening. Mimiko's breathing had become more rhythmic, the sobs to almost completely stop. She'd cried herself out, and he didn't blame her. She'd been through enough. He wondered if he'd dare catch a few winks himself. Badrick's men were keeping an eye on the outside. He could hear them as they moved around, some of them edgy, others just shifting weight. He counted 6 distinct men surrounding their apartment, with perhaps more a bit further away. Though, if there were, any sound they made was covered by the usual street noises.
Taro, I'm gonna take a nap. Keep an ear open for Mimiko, will you? Call me if anything happens.
He folded his arms and slouched back into the couch, eyes closed. At first, Mimiko found it hard to sleep. Her headache banged, making her feel as though her skull was rattling. Her knee ached dully, but at least the new brace gave her a little more flexibility to find a semi-comfortable position. The tears wouldn't stop coming. She tried to pull it together, to keep the sobs from welling up, but she was at her emotional strength's end, and she knew it. At least Jiro wasn't in the room to watch her go through emotional hell and not be able to do a thing about it. She wasn't sure, but she thought it might hurt more to watch him hurt for her, too. Who would do such a thing, she wondered. And even though the 3 men had gone off to talk, she had a pretty good idea about what they discussed. She was center to it all. She just wished she knew why she was the one being targeted. But thinking about it sent her mind into a spiral of depression that was far from worth the effort. It was only a matter of time before she dropped off into sleep, too exhausted to function anymore. She dreamed. Thunder rumbled through the night sky. The mud puddles she'd fallen into had splashed up into her eyes, and she had a hard time clearing them as the rain came pouring down. But when she did, she almost wished she hadn't, because the vampire with the glowing eyes was standing no more than a dozen yards from her, watching her with bloodlust in his eyes. She trembled, her small body hunched up. She couldn't run anymore, even if she tried. Her limbs were frozen in fear. She couldn't look away, her chocolate brown eyes staring into the glowing ones in front of her. The vampire slowly began to stalk towards her, his face lit up with a malicious, anticipatory grin, fangs fully extended. Every part of him seemed to be laughing as he slowly moved in, unafraid of interference from anything. She was as good as his, and they both knew it. She tried to scream, but couldn't. Despite all the water around her, her throat was as dry as a desert. She tried to mouth the name of her mother. The vampire laughed, stopping 5 feet from her.
Soon enough. Soon enough.
He crouched for the spring, one hand on the ground, knees bent deeply. Her breathing sped up, heart pounding for all it was worth, whether in defiance or fear was anyone's guess. He leaned back just a little further, then sprang forward in a blur of motion, straight at her throat. Jiro woke with a start. At first he wasn't sure what woke him. He could hear Kotaro still playing in his room. He obviously hadn't called out for him. He couldn't have been out long, he decided, as he heard the same tuneless humming from before. He listened more closely for a moment. Then he found it. It wasn't as loud as Kotaro, but still very definite. Mimiko was breathing heavily from her room, her heart pounding like it wanted to fly out of her chest. But despite his intense concentration, he couldn't hear any other sound, smell any other presence. It had to be another nightmare. He wondered why she hadn't screamed. Now that he thought about it, the smell of fear was strong in his nostrils, even from the front room. Without another thought, he was rushing to her room, through the door, and was by her side. Her blankets were twisted around her, and she was murmuring something incomprehensible.
Mimiko!
He tried to shake her from whatever horror now gripped her. He hoped the sound of his voice would be enough, but it wasn't. He touched her shoulder, raising his voice just a little.
Mimiko, wake up! It's all right. It's just a dream.
No.
Her lips parted, and she panted as though she were running.
Please, no.
She rolled over, moaning into her pillow. Jiro slipped a hand under her shoulders and pulled her into a sitting position. gently shaking her, but it wasn't enough to break her from sleep. Her head lolled against his chest. She was trembling all over. Obviously, the events of the day had been too much for her. He mentally berated himself. He should have made her talk through the situation, put it into a better perspective. It was too late for that now. Mimiko's eyebrows scrunched up, eyes remaining closed. Sweat beaded on her forehead and rolled down her face. She shook with every breath. He had to do something before the strain broke her completely. The conventional methods obviously were not working, and he dared not use water because of what it would do to himself. He looked around the room, searching for ideas, anything. A thought crossed his mind, but he dismissed it. It cropped up again, refusing to leave. Would it work? It wouldn't allow him to share what she was going through. But it just might break through her inner consciousness enough that he could calm her. It was worth the risk. His decision made, Jiro gently set Mimiko against her pillow. Slowly, he reached for her arm, pushing her sleeve up to the elbow. Like he had once before, he brought his lips close to her skin, her arm held by one of his gloved hands. With a soft caress, he kissed her wrist and pulled back enough for his fangs to have room as they extended further from his jaw. He hesitated for just a moment. This was a dangerous moment. He didn't doubt his self-control, but her body's ability to cope with what he had in mind. To be able to resonate with her properly, and for what he hoped would be long enough, he'd have to drink more than a few drops. And, with everything that had gone on lately, her body's ability to cope was likely compromised. But the danger of leaving her in this state outweighed any other thoughts. If he didn't break her from the nightmare, it would cause other kinds of damage that might not be repairable. The body would eventually recover from blood loss. He sank his fangs into her wrist. A shudder ran down Mimiko's body and her eyes flew open in shock. A gasp slid between her lips as her back arched. Jiro's other hand instantly went to support her so that she wouldn't harm herself. He could tell by the blankness in her eyes that it was only her body that had responded so far. Her blood tasted slightly off, possibly a sign of anemia. It wouldn't have surprised him, considering her appetite as of late. He kept an eye on her pulse as her blood flowed into him, building and strengthening the connection between them. After about a minute, he stopped, releasing her wrist from his fangs. It would have to be enough. He didn't dare take more. He already knew he'd have to keep a close watch in case of complications. Gently, he lowered her back against the bedding as her eyes closed. He was grateful that nothing had snapped, despite how much her body had reacted. He licked the small trickle of blood from the puncture marks. The slight flow would stop in a minute. She was flushed, but her heart wasn't pounding quite as hard, nor did her breath come as frantically, both of which he considered good signs. But she still wasn't overly responsive, lying like a lifeless doll. He thought about their first meeting on the beach, and how he'd seen her, hoping the images were breaking through the nightmares. Despite his initial mistrust at that time, he had seen her as some kind of angel. He tried to bring up every happy memory he had with her, anything that might pull her through. His thoughts went to the ocean and the sound of it crashing against the beach. Mimiko stirred.
Jiro.
Her fingers clenched, then relaxed. She smelled the ocean, could hear seagulls. Behind her eyelids, the darkness started to brighten like the sun was rising behind them, dispelling nighttime shadows. Jiro leaned over her, his eyes searching her face. He tasted the air.
Mimiko, can you hear me?
Her heart gave a very strange thump, like it was beating with someone else's, being calmed by it. She hadn't felt that since. The brunette gradually opened her eyes again.
Jiro?
She blinked in confusion, a sense of euphoria still lingering in her body, confusing her even more.
Why can I hear your songs?
He leaned back just a little, lifting her arm into view. A slight trickle of blood ran down the skin in explanation, which he quickly blotted with a sleeve. Her eyes grew large as she suddenly understood what he'd done.
Why?
She tried to sit, but couldn't. He put a restraining hand on her shoulder, just in case.
It's best if you lie quietly. I only did what I thought was necessary. You were trapped in a dream I couldn't wake you from.
Her breath quickened, remembering.
The vampire.
Her eyes went wide once more.
I could see him.
She grabbed at his sleeve.
He was stalking me. He was gonna...
She couldn't go on and closed her eyes against the thought, tears leaking out their corners. Jiro pulled her towards him as he sat on the bed.
It's all right. I won't let that happen. You're safe.
He projected thoughts of warmth and happiness towards her. She could feel the sincerity of his words as the blood he'd taken from her resonated inside him. She relaxed into his arms, suddenly feeling safer than she had for a long time.
Thank you.
The two sat like that for a while. Mimiko was so quiet, Jiro wondered if she hadn't fallen back to sleep. He looked down to see her staring at him.
Aren't you tired?
He brushed a strand of hair from her face.
I'm afraid of going to sleep. I don't want to dream. I don't want to see those gleaming eyes anymore. I don't want...
He pressed one gloved finger to her lips.
It's alright, I understand. You don't have to do anything you don't want to.
But he slowly rocked her, letting the calm of the ocean fill his thoughts like a lullaby. He knew she needed the sleep, desperately needed it, and he would encourage her as much as he could. As for her dreams, he could only suggest things to keep others out. She closed her eyes and saw through his as he watched her. Was that how others saw her, she wondered, slightly haggard and pale, though that could have been from the poor lighting. There were 2 bright points at her cheeks. She opened her eyes again so that she didn't have to see them. Jiro frowned slightly and looked away. Perhaps it would help her if he closed his eyes as well, he thought, realizing what she had probably seen. Perhaps she was too keyed up to sleep.
Are you thirsty?
She was surprised when he broke the silence. He saw momentary panic in her eyes and reinforced his thoughts of the ocean, something he knew would soothe her.
I thought maybe a glass of milk.
He wouldn't have minded feeding her something a bit more substantial while he was at it, but they would take things one step at a time. She eyed him warily. Her thoughts were still muddled, but she was thirsty, and milk did sound good.
Okay.
He gently set her back down.
I'll be right back.
He turned to leave the room, but stopped at a glance, hearing her heart speed up a little.
It's alright, Mimiko. I'll only be gone for a minute. You won't be alone. You can still hear my thoughts, can't you?
She nodded, a bit reluctantly, but he was right. She wasn't alone, and she couldn't afford to rely so heavily on him for her emotional stability, no matter how fragile it was at the moment. But she wanted that comfort, needed it in fact. She put one hand to her head, feeling a little dizzy. Jiro took a little longer than necessary to procure 1 glass of warm milk, but the soothing warmth of the milk was more than worth the wait as she sipped it, once again in his comforting arms. He had to help her hold the glass. She felt like a little child, Janai holding her in his lap as he comforted her after a bad dream. It had been such a long time since she'd last felt that childhood security. The memory was more than comfort to her, the sound of the ocean running in the background of her mind. She'd always lived near the ocean. After about half an hour, Jiro gently placed her under the covers. He wasn't sure how long the resonance had lasted, but at least it had lasted long enough to set her into happier dreams. She was smiling slightly in her sleep. With a sigh, he tucked her in and left the room, leaving the door partially open so that a small amount of light spilled in. Even though it was only late afternoon, with her curtains closed, it was almost as dark as night inside.
Sleep well, Mimiko.
He glanced back one more time before leaving. A quick knock sounded from the main level of the apartment building. Jiro hadn't had a moment to really relax before its sound reached him.
Now what?
He sniffed the air, but the wind was coming from the wrong direction to bring him much scent. One thing he was certain about was that whoever was out there was a black blood. Though the scent was slightly masked by other things, it was also somewhat familiar. His eyes registered surprise as he opened the door. He took an involuntary step back, suddenly wishing he'd grabbed his katana on the way down. As he stepped back, his visitor stepped forward.
Well, Silverblade, aren't you going to invite me in?